Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in again for It Starts With You, coming to you from your Human Rights and Equity Office at Thames Valley District School Board. And as you know, we want to provide opportunities for you to learn and engage with us and engage with others and their stories. And today we are thrilled to have Judy Hanazawa, who is here to talk to us today about her experiences as a Japanese Canadian. And I'm just going to read this part so I don't miss anything. And it's just an introduction to give you an idea as to why we were so excited to have her today and to share her story. So we are honored to have Judy with us. Judy is a distinguished community advocate and human rights leader deeply committed to advancing equity and justice for Japanese Canadians and marginalized communities. She currently serves as the president of the Greater Vancouver Japanese Canadian Citizens Association and has been a longtime member and past leader of its Human Rights Committee. Judy's advocacy began in earnest following the federal redress for Japanese Canadians in 1989, catalyzing her work on readdress anti-racism and community development. Her efforts have not only highlighted the impacts of systemic discrimination, but have also guided collaborative initiatives to address anti-Asian racism, support immigrant communities, and champion human rights education throughout British Columbia. Beyond her leadership roles, Judy is a pivotal voice in conversations around policy reform and social justice, working alongside organizations like the Resilience BC Anti-Racism Network to tackle the roots and repercussions of racial prejudice and exclusions in Canada. So thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. So just to get people started and have a good understanding as to who you are, maybe as to they can start to understand why we were so excited to have you here. Share with us any memories growing up with parents who had experienced internment. But first, even explaining what that is. What
Okay.
was the Japanese internment?
Well, the Japanese internment, which the government labeled as internment, but more of our community members and certainly me, I call it an incarceration. And
Mhm.
it happened based on the Pacific War, the war with Japan that Canada engaged in, which was in 1941. So in that time, despite the fact, and I guess including the fact that Japanese Canadians, along with other Asian Canadians, faced discrimination and marginalization from the time of arrival, um, there was a sense that there was no trust in Japanese Canadians who were living amongst everybody. And so the government ordered that the entire population on the Pacific coast would be brought inland by 100 miles and incarcerated. Their movement and their freedom would be curtailed. And so in 1942, the order was given. And so all these communities and families had to move, were uprooted and placed, and many families being placed initially at Hastings Park in Vancouver, which was mostly like the CN Pacific National exhibition grounds where barns were kept for animals. And they were incarcerated there initially before being dispersed to various inland communities in British Columbia. So that was the incarceration or internment. It was the wholesale uprooting of a community along the Pacific coast of Japanese Canadians because of the Pacific War. But I have to say, it was based on an established systemic racist attitude towards Asian Canadians,
Mhm.
which had existed from the time of arrival. So that
So,
was what.
and I'm glad that you corrected that and used the words incarceration, and that's something that I am going to use going forward because that really does describe what happened. And one of the things that just in doing my research that really struck me is that there probably would have been Japanese Canadians who went to fight in the war on behalf
Yes,
of Canada. And then
yes,
I always go to trying to think about putting myself in the position of those people when I'm reading history and things like that and thinking what that could have felt like to have found out what was happening here with the incarceration when they were off on another land. and just not being able to really reconcile or make sense of that.
Yes, that was the situation. And among the people who were incarcerated were veterans of the First World War who were
Who
Japanese
fought.
Canadian. Yes, who fought in the First World War and who were incarcerated and who were brokenhearted, as everybody was, but who especially because of their effort to belong by enlisting. And then in the Second World War later, as the war progressed, there were recruitments of Japanese Canadians, but British Columbia did not allow recruitment. And so some of our people went to Alberta to enlist, and they were accepted. And mostly their work was in the Pacific War because of the understanding of Japanese to work with the espionage sort of level of surveillance and overseeing what was going on in the Pacific War. So, yes, and so there was an especially poignant aspect to this, based on the fact that some of our people were actually out there fighting for Canada.
Like I think one of the highest forms of showing patriotism, like you're saying, they're leaving their province because they're not allowed to enlist. They make intention to go to another province so that they can enlist and support and fight on behalf of their country. And yet it must have felt like their country turned on them.
It did. And yet there was this sort of driven kind of behavior to just insist and prove that we belonged.
Yeah.
That was part of it too, to prove the loyalty.
Yeah.
And so they went to those lengths to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when the incarceration happened, you were born after the incarceration?
Yes, I was born in 1947.
I didn't want to give up your age, Judy.
That's okay.
That's okay. I'm just joking. I tell everyone my age. I just realized as I was asking you that what I was doing.
That's okay. But I have two sisters who are older than me. And the first, Shirley, my oldest, was born in 41. So she was incarcerated along with my parents and grandparents. And they were fishing people living in Steveston, which is a small community around Richmond, British Columbia, which is by the Fraser River. And and my family from Japan come from fishing people as well. So when they came to Canada, my grandfather, he became a fisherman. My father became a fisherman. And they had established themselves because my grandfather came around 1910. So by 1941, there was a lot of established life going on in Steveston among the fishing community. And so when it happened, my sister, my parents, my grandparents were uprooted. They left everything behind, and they were placed in what's called a self-supporting camp. And that was called Bridge River. And in Bridge River, there was government oversight of what was going on. But because of a payment of money, which the family gathered up money in order to pay the government, the fathers in those families were allowed to remain with the rest of the family. In other places, and in most Japanese Canadian situations, the people were separated. The men were off to work camps, and the women were off to internment sites or the incarceration sites with their children. But in our family, even though we lived in very, very basic circumstances, because of the payment of that money, the fathers in the families in those camps were able to stay with their families. So my family lived in Bridge River. It was a very, very basic housing. And my middle sister, was born in 43 in Bridge River. And she was very, very premature. My mother went through a lot of hardship. And she describes the snowy conditions, the ice on the inside of the very basic house that was put together. And my sister was only 3 pounds when she was born. And so, but the family remained until about 1945. And there was an edict by the government that said that you had to move further away in British Columbia. There was an intention to remove Japanese Canadians from the province. And so by 1945, when the war ended, there was a more of a movement eastward, and actually the actual edict saying you either go east of the Rockies or back to Japan. So yeah, so there were people who were deported to Japan even though they had never lived there
Never
before.
lived there. Yeah.
Yeah. And
so what do you think, Judy, was the reason? I mean, I'm going to suspect, but just what was the reason of wanting more, not allowing you to return?
Well, it was based on the political view driven by fear and hate among the population to really honestly rid, and I think it would be called ethnic cleanse the entire province of Japanese Canadians. And so the actual proof of that, I believe, is the fact that once people were moved, their properties and their belongings were confiscated. And then, so the land properties were also confiscated and then were sold without consent. And so the proceeds of that were also allocated to pay for the incarceration, to pay for people's food needs and so on if they were on the government programs for incarceration. And so there was actually nothing. There were no communities and nothing for the communities to return to. Yes. And so many people went east to Alberta to work on the sugar beet farms, or to Manitoba, or to Ontario. And to this day, this dispersed community has grown over the decades. You know, so there are Japanese Canadians in all the provinces, less in Saskatchewan, but certainly all across the country. Not so much in the Maritimes, but certainly up to Quebec. There are Japanese Canadian communities.
Well, and when you talk about the eradication or that attempt, and that's what was happening, and basically you're going to incarcerate people, then you're going to steal their things to pay for the incarceration.
Yes.
But then it also makes me think about when we're thinking about colonization and capitalism and things like that, when you talk about generational wealth.
Yes.
So you start to think about, okay, so you're 1910, I think you said,
yes.
is when was your father that came?
No, my grandfather.
Your grandfather came and was able to establish, because fishing and fishery was similar to what he was doing back in Japan, able to set that up here and establish that. And so to be forward and be able to sort of allow for generations to build, that's kind of cut out right there. And you're having to start over again.
Yes, and with nothing to go from to begin, but that was your place in life at that point of starting all over.
Exactly.
And I have to comment, because you've mentioned colonization, and the reality is that, as you know, there had been the colonial system, which uprooted and displaced and dispossessed the Indigenous community. So the system that it was established on that basis existed upon each arrival of racialized communities, to Canada. And so, of course, Chinese Canadians who first came as East Asians and the South Asian community were marginalized, were not equal, were given the most horrible, dangerous jobs to do in order to
survive. Chinese coming to help finish off the railway.
That's right.
And then we'll put a Chinese head tax on you. And so we'll tell you can bring your family to entice you and get you to come. And then when you've done the job, and that's why Canada got to connect, we then say, no, you can't do that. We're going to
that's right. And the right to vote wasn't awarded to Chinese Canadians until 1947. And for us Japanese Canadians, it wasn't given to us until the end of that time of uprooting, which was 1949, which was 4 years after the end of the Pacific War. So actually, the term enemy alien, which is what we were labeled in order to rid the province of Japanese Canadians, no longer applied after 45 because the war was over, and yet there was no freedom to return to the coast until 1949. And that's when Japanese Canadians were given the right to vote, both provincially and federally.
And I think it's important, well, it is important for people to really understand this history. And like when you drew some parallels to First Nations, Indigenous peoples, that it seems like there's this playbook. Like
Yeah, there
this
was
is
a
what we
place.
do, right? This is what we do. And I mean, going on a whole different thing, a playbook that South Africa thought was great. And so they used that to sort of a great foundation for apartheid. And I think it's important for Canadians or anyone who wants to really understand Canadian history as to this is what happened. And you're still here, Judy. So, meaning that this isn't like a long time, 300 years ago or things, but the impact. So you're born at the end of this incarceration, and then we're talking 4 years after the ending of the war. Finally, we say, okay, we're going to stop calling them aliens and we'll allow them to vote now.
Mhm.
But was that something, and so growing up, was that something that your family, your parents talked about? Or how did you come to understand what traumas and horrific things they had to endure?
Yeah, that's a very good observation and question, Michelle. The honest truth is that many of our families, as the children were growing, post-war, post-internment or incarceration, there was silence. There was silence. Parents did not want to speak of what they had endured. And so when 1949 came, and in my case, my family, my people were fishing people. And regardless of other people who went east to Ontario never came back, my family decided, no, we're going back to the coast, we're going back into fishing. And so when we came back, my father was finally able, through some policies within the Canadian Fishing Company, able to rent a boat. And he called some of his relatives who also were deciding to return to fishing,
Mm-hmm.
to rent those boats and to begin their work again as commercial fishermen. And so that's what happened there. But the actual return, the search for housing and so on, was something that was a real challenge at the time. But fortunately for us children, in Vancouver, there had been a district called Powell Street, which was the site of a Japanese Canadian kind of a neighborhood in Strathcona. And it was sort of the low cost area of Vancouver, and now today it's called the downtown east side, and it's got notorious for having a lot of social and other issues
Mm-hmm.
happening. But in that time, pre-war, it was a thriving Japanese Canadian community area. And so my family actually returned to that area after the war, and we were able to get a house that my family rented first, and then later on they saved their pennies and purchased a house in the area. But the good thing about that area was that it was an area where many struggling families of all ethnicities, and including a Black community
Yeah.
in the area as well, we're together, and all us kids at Strathcona were like friends among so many of
Yeah.
us of different backgrounds. It was an amazing time for me to grow up there. But at the same time, it was a time of rebuilding. My mother worked in the fish cannery, which was close by. My father went off fishing. And my older sister had to babysit. We had working parents who were away trying to pull things together.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a time of struggle, for sure. Yeah, post-war in the 50s. Yeah.
So with the silence, and I understand the silence, and when we learn or hear about other communities that have had similar things happen, not exactly the same, but the silence that comes with it.
Yeah. Yes.
So how did you come to learn about what had happened?
Yeah. It came in little bits here and there, but certainly not by a sit-down talk with mom and dad at all.
Mm-hmm.
It came mostly from my older sister. My oldest sister who actually went to university. It was that much later, and who got the full story. And I remember among us sisters, and my sisters were actually 5 and 6 years older than me. So I was sort of in on my older sister's discussions and so on. And I learned through my sister mainly about the
Mm-hmm.
actual facts of that time. And so at that point, we talked to our mom. And that's when she told us stories about my sister Kay's time in Bridge River and how hard it was and why Kay was such a little baby when she was
Mm-hmm.
born. And so she did elaborate, but they didn't feel that they what they didn't feel the point of sitting down and giving us the story because they were into, well, now that that's happened, let's just get down to work here and get moving on getting things going again for our family. And I think many families were in that mode of
Like a
getting
survival
themselves
mode
going. Yes, exactly.
and I think I don't know, like I just think how much energy, like emotional, mental, psychological energy it would have to take to be able to actually sit and process
Yeah,
what your country did to you. So it's either like I'm going to put the energy in this and trying to make a better life, a life for our children and
yeah,
for us.
yeah,
And probably thinking, look, we don't have the luxury of doing that. We don't have the luxury to sit and go through that. And I think it's also something of that generation as well, that
yes.
we've got to keep moving. We've got to keep moving. And I
Yeah.
feel sometimes it might be almost like opening up a Pandora's box.
Mhm.
Like I might be so brought back into that. Then how am I able to be there for my children, for my husband or my wife?
Yes, that's right. Those are the things that sort of were a little beyond the scope of my mom and dad because they just felt that, okay, if we work hard, we'll have our own home one day,
Hmm.
and as long as the kids go to school and they're doing what they're told, we're going to get better. Things will
Yeah.
get better. And the issue of racism, and I remember situations that we went through as a family. I remember going to a restaurant, after a family drive, and my dad saying, "Well, let's go get an ice cream cone." Sitting down in a restaurant, thinking that we'd just pick up something kind of like a dessert to eat, and never getting served,
Hmm.
never getting served, just sitting there, sitting there, sitting there. And finally, my dad saying, "Okay, let's go, let's get out of here."
Yeah.
you know so those things happened, and I remember also a time when my father was driving, and for some reason he made a left turn, and the police officer came, and I had never seen my father behave in such an obedient way because the police officer was talking to him at the window there, and so I knew things had happened, but I didn't ingest and understand what was going on with all of that. I knew about racism in sort of a sensory way, uh,
Hmm.
but my parents just put it into themselves in their own thinking that this was the way it was. We got to just keep moving and struggling, to get the things that we need to have to survive and to do better. And yeah,
Absolutely. And I think it's a lot of what other people from other races and backgrounds who are not white, part of the mainstream, um, what they did, like I really do, in speaking with other families of, like I said, not the same situation, but it was kind of like we didn't talk about it.
mhm, no,
But even though your dad didn't talk about it, you then later found out, so you did a little bit of research, Judy,
yeah,
found out that he was a little bit of an activist as well,
he
right? So there
was,
was a letter
yeah.
that he wrote. Can you share with our It Starts With You family about that letter? Because I was that put a smile on my face.
Yeah, I did too. I did too. Yeah, my dad, at the point of getting this check for $14, for all the things that were removed, and at the time, in 41, my parents were newly married, and my sister was born when the incarceration happened, and they had to leave everything behind. So he stored everything in this place in Vancouver, which was where Japanese Canadians could store their furniture and everything. And he was promised by the custodian that this would just be kept here for your safeguarding. And so then, of course, he's upset when he gets the word that the items had been sold off and this is the check. And so he wrote back and said, no, thank you. This is what the value was. This is what I got. And what is the point of this? And I was very, I guess, happy that he did that at the time of his writing. It would have been, I think, February of 1947. So I hadn't been born yet. But I'm sure my mom and dad were thinking at the time as they were sitting there in Merritt, God, we could have used that furniture. We had nothing here. And so he responded to that, the letter that was given to him about the sale. And I think, given that he also showed his use of language and his sort of the irony of that situation, it was all there, very clearly written in how he put the words in that letter. And as I said, I think the CBC talked to me about this at one time, way back in 2017. And I said, the thing that got me, though, was at the end of his signature, he wrote his number, which was his identification number. Yeah.
While he was incarcerated.
Yeah, he wrote that. And so I thought, yeah, that's him, doing what he needed to do to share his disappointment and his anger. And yet he still had to write his number as his identity, as a person, as a Japanese Canadian.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, my father did have his own way. He was a very tough fisherman, and but he had his own way, and he kind of didn't want to waste his time. He just worked hard. Yeah.
So moving out of that, so what can you tell us about your journey? Because I know that you were and still are involved with the National Association of Japanese Canadians, and then I had referenced another organization that you're the president of. Can you kind of share with us what took you to taking it? Because not everyone does that.
No, it's
taking
true.
on, and some people do, and some people don't. So what was it for you, and how did it start off and kind of brought you to where you are today as far as really engaging in this work?
Yeah, it sort of grew as I was into it. But initially, and I have to say, just to correct that, I'm on the board now of the GBJPC. I'm not the president, and because that was a couple of years ago. But as growing up, as I think the stats show that Japanese Canadians outmarried, to a degree of the most outmarried community in Canada. And it was into the 90% levels of outmarriage. And that was based on dispersal, a community dispersed.
Right.
And growing up and families growing in different communities elsewhere in Canada. So there was a lot of outmarriage, and it just, I guess, stresses the point of destroyed communities too. And all of us who are outmarried, and me included, we really feel blessed with our children, but we know the history. We know the history of what brought us to where we were. And in my situation, I married my children's father, and he was a teacher. He teaching up north in northern BC, and I was newly graduated from UBC with actually a fine arts degree. And I got into social work because this was a northern community which had no social worker, but I had a university degree. And so that's how I got into social work. And it was very, very, very tough social work, child and family services. And yet, looking back, it was part of the actual systemic, structure, which sort of shows the remnants of colonialism still existing in government systems, right? And so I worked with Indigenous people up north, and throughout my marriage, I was doing provincial social work, very tough work, and then I began to realize the Indigenous situation with children being the highest percentage of children in care.
Mm-hmm.
And so it all sort of came together when the redress movement happened, and I received my redress payment in 1989, and I went back to school and got my master's degree in social work. But in doing that, I focused on Indigenous child and family service. And I worked within the Squamish Nation here, an Indigenous community nation, to work with them about their program development and what they wanted to do. So in getting involved in that way, it really enlightened me as to the power of working in one's own community. And so it actually turned itself around so that I began to get involved in the Japanese Canadian community because I was involved working in an Indigenous community.
Right. You're like,
So,
maybe I should come home and do this. Right.
Yeah. So ever since then, it's sort of been a dual kind of focus for me because, I've never left my time with the Squamish Nation. I'm still involved with them today, even, as sort of like a kind of a steering committee member for their own intention of self-governing their own program. Yeah. And so that did begin my work focused on my own community. And I think based on that social work background that I had, it sort of veered towards the area of anti-racism work and human rights advocacy. And so that's how it started.
So I can see by the first time when I met you briefly on screen why my spirit connected to yours. So you knew that I was a social worker as well, and I did work in child welfare for over 20 years, and had done some brief time in one of my roles working with 3 of the nations here that are closer to our London community. So as I'm listening to you, I'm like, yes, I get it. And that's why I'm in human rights and equity. But so yes, thank you for sharing that. So you right now you're on the board. And I know that the association also does provide some support. Can you speak to, I know this isn't your area of expertise, but just what supports they're providing to schools or educators with regards to educating them on Japanese Canadians and the history?
Yeah, well, the 2 programs that were sent by Misty were actually part of another major national project, which focused on the dispossession part of what happened to Japanese Canadians. But in its development of that project, which was very comprehensive, they had different components, and one of them was education. And so those 2 programs that you received were part of the that project. And even today, there's a group of teachers who are developing a project for British Columbia teachers for training teachers about Japanese Canadian history. And so these things are still going on. The National Association of Japanese Canadians supports those kinds of specialized programs, and also is working very closely with other communities about developing coalitions to address human rights issues and to do anti-racism work together. So there's lots of different parts of the national organization that focus upon human rights, anti-racism. The other part of the National Association is to look at the well-being of community. And so there's organizational support, capacity building, there's a cultural development, ongoing cultural development for the national community, and local community projects and ways to support the various communities across Canada and their local focus of community support. And so being part of the national organization, it has its different components, and certainly one of them has been to provide support towards Japanese Canadian history education. And now they're kind of connecting history education with social justice awareness. So
Yes.
in British Columbia, the focus has been the two-sided thing of learning the history, trying to determine what are the aspects for bringing about the experience for what government did and why did government do this,
Mm-hmm.
looking at social justice issues, and I guess developing the critical thinking of the students to look at what is social justice and why does it exist, what is racism, where does that come from, and what needs to be done to create the kind of society that people envision to be the best for all people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. So I'm just thinking about educators and administrators in our school board. So it would be appropriate for them to reach out because we're going to have under our podcast some links and things to the resources that were shared with us. But it would be appropriate for someone possibly to connect with, let's say, Misty, if they're wanting some guidance or whatnot. Is that sort of
Yeah.
something that falls under her role?
Well, it can, and yet if you contact the main office of the
Mm-hmm.
NAJC, it's within the purview of the board of the NAJC, but there is a group of teachers who are connected and who can be accessed through the board
Oh, okay.
in order to provide more
That
direct
more direct
connection.
support.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and this the teaching program of teaching teachers is still active right now, so that I think it would be a wonderful program to connect to actually. And we do have some. I do know some people, and to be honest with you, when the matter came up of what happened in your school district with the lesson
Mm-hmm.
plan and so on, we did refer to that group to get their feedback on what could be done.
Okay. Yeah.
So they're already aware of the situation, and I think they would be a good resource for your school district.
No,
Uh,
I absolutely think it would be a great resource and just it's supporting educators in that way because they went through the same education system
yeah,
for the
yeah,
most part, right? So it's how do we disrupt that system? And whenever I talk to people about history, I would say, if we could just teach history from the voices, I'm gonna have to move.
oh, okay.
We're trying to save money here on a sensor, so if I don't
Oh,
move, it thinks I'm not here.
oh,
Um, but I always thought, and always say, I want history to be taught from the voices of the people. So as they entered, if we're talking about Canada, as each identity entered,
yes,
I want it from their voice,
yes.
their
And I was thinking
perspective.
about as well that
Yeah.
it's the
Hmm.
stories that count. And an example of that is that I've been a part of a group called the Japanese-Canadian Hastings Park Interpretive Center Society. And Hastings Park, as I said, was where Japanese Canadians were all rounded up and brought and held until they were dispersed. And many and mothers and children lived in the livestock barns,
Yeah, I
and it
saw
was a
that.
horrendous
I saw
experience.
that they moved out the horses, I think, a few days before. Like, I need
Yeah,
people to really understand that. And they did not have plumbing and things that people would have been at that time accustomed
yeah,
to. They didn't have that. They used the troughs, the feeding
yes,
troughs.
that's
And
right. I
so
did.
people to really understand, people weren't moved into nice, lovely, heated
Absolutely.
cabins with indoor plumbing.
No, no,
Um,
no, no.
yeah.
And so that was the first experience. And I have to add that for tuberculosis patients had to be removed from the various hospitals and who were Japanese Canadian and were placed also at Hastings Park. And so there was a wing connected to the livestock barns, which was a hospital ward.
Mhm.
And I have to say that some patients did not survive.
Of course not.
They did
Of
not
course not.
survive, and so
No.
there were yeah, that was the situation. And what I'm referring to now is the fact that in this society that I've been a part of Hastings Park, we had an opportunity to develop interpretive signage around Hastings Park, which is part of the Pacific National Exhibition in Vancouver. And so, in developing the signage, it was very apparent that the best way to teach about the actual experience was to quote people's stories. And
Mhm.
I think that's what you're referring to, the actual stories.
Yeah, the stories, or even I'm thinking like people from other identities and other backgrounds have written things. So when students are in schools, like in learning in the curriculum, is to hear those stories. Like as a kid growing up, a Black child, I didn't know, I didn't learn about enslavement of Black bodies on Canadian soil.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are Black people who have written about that. So I'm
Right.
thinking, how do we make that really where things come from as far as when you're learning history, not
Yes.
that the victors
Yes.
who won
Yeah.
get to write and depict people in such a way that I always say it made kind of Canada seem like the really cool cousins of the North, that everyone came here and they were saved and everything was great. That a lot of
Yeah.
people growing up don't know, and I think it's by design,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
this is how we've taught history. And so
Yeah.
that's why I was so happy that you had agreed to come on to share the story, because that's what makes it real for people and to connect. And I'm hoping that this will sort of inspire people to do more learning. And it's not
Mhm.
just, and we put it out there, and that's for everyone to do more learning and to be critical. Because I liked at one point we were talking about how to be critical thinkers.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
when I hear a story, I think, well, I wonder what the person that they're writing about, I wonder what they
Yeah.
would actually say, how they
Yes.
would describe this situation. And why is it that, the language is even different? So I'm not going to say internment, incarceration, because that puts a vision in people's minds. When we talk about, you said they're moving out the livestock and put people in there. They didn't lay down carpet.
No.
They didn't put up some
No.
drywall or something, plaster the
No.
walls to keep the cold out.
Yes.
So I think that's important. But before we go, I want you to share, if you can, what keeps you moving in this, because you do have such a life spirit, and energy about you, and how do you keep moving? Like what inspires you, or what would you like to share with everyone?
I think it's a hard one because, but I have to say that once you, like for myself, becoming aware of what people have gone through, what actual society has done, made those mistakes, terrible mistakes, and they're being made today still,
Mhm.
of course, right? There's a lot to fight for to make the world a better place. And there's been so much inspiration from many different sources. And one of the things, maybe as you know, Michelle, is when you're doing social work in rural communities, and you meet all kinds of incredible,
Yep.
simple grandma type people who are just the most amazing human beings, but they don't have that profile that
Right.
society gives to people. But you meet so many of them because they're doing what they need to do out of their sense of responsibility and love for their families, for their communities. I've met them, and I've met many in the Indigenous community. So as long as I have done work, I've met inspiring people along the way, and I know that they're there, and they're carrying on, that they're not going to quit.
No.
I'm not going to quit.
No. No.
So
No, we're
so
not.
yeah, and it's just part of who we are. And I think, and of course now I'm at the point where I think about my grandkids, you know, and
Mhm.
you got to do what you got to do to make things as best you can, given how messy things are right now.
Yeah.
To make things better, because it wasn't them. It wasn't their lives that created anything. They were born into this
Exactly.
this situation, and we really need to keep going. We need to reach out and work with each other in order to offset the kind of strange and insane kind of things that are going on now, which are producing such an othering kind of an attitude, and a blaming attitude. It's very polarized and unwell right now, and we really need to address it, and we need to do it together. We need to build a connection and coalition and a movement, I guess. I think in terms of that now, And one of the things that we're doing as the NAJC Human Rights Committee, and now we have a new chair.
Okay.
And his name is Stefan Hamadi, which is he's a wonderful young man. But we are really making a point of reaching out to the Indigenous community, because I think in Canada, and we will with other communities too, but I think here in Canada, it's one of the primary issues that really speaks loudly of the work that needs to be done. And so we're making an effort to to stand with them and to do what we can as an allied community. And I have to say personally for myself, I would apologize for my family as a settler, because I know when my parents came, my grandparent came, and he fished in those waters. He fished in those waters based on what was taken from the coastal Indigenous people. So we've all been part of that horrible colonial system, and it remains today to still be opposed. And I think with the kind of gifts I've been given working in Indigenous communities, I've learned a lot from that. Including understanding the all my relations view of things, that we are connected to one another. We are connected to all living things. We're connected to Mother Earth. And that's the intent, to live in connection, I believe. That's what I believe.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Judy, that was beautiful, and it really encompassed, I think, the person that you are. So I thank you for answering my very deep question. No, really appreciate you taking the time, and I know that this is going to be very, very meaningful for the staff that we have to hear your story. And so I thank you for sharing your story. And you inspire me, because yes,
Yes,
there's
indeed.
times when the work that we do can be very challenging, but when you come across someone who this is sort of who they are, I like how you describe that, because that's how I describe how I am within this. That's just who we are. And we do it out of the love, I would say, for humanity,
Mhm.
and my belief in humanity, and that we can do better, but we have to do better together.
Yes,
So
that's the
I
point. Yeah.
want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone who has tuned in to listen, to watch us. Again, as I always say, send us an email, the hreo@tvdsb.ca. Send us an email. Let us know what you thought about this. If you'd like to see Judy again,
Mhm.
what are some of your takeaways? And yes, it starts with you, because we truly believe that as much as the policies and laws and everything that we can change or put in place, it really starts with you as to how you enter this conversation, and how you everybody. If I think if everyone does a little bit, just a little bit, everybody, it will move us so much farther down the way. And taking time to understand these stories is a huge part of that. So until next time, thank you, and thank you, Judy.
Thank you very much too. Thank you.